This is the first time I've told this story in a manner like this. Now, I'm not a native English speaker or writer. I live in Brazil, and my family do not have anything extraordinary about them. My dad's an engineer and my mother is a psychologist. I'm 30 now, but this story occurred when I was maybe 10 or 11, sometime in that gap. It was the period of school break. Here it occurs in the middle of the year. So me, my cousin, who was a little older, maybe 13, and her brother, who was the same age, went to our grandparents' house. They lived in the countryside. They live in a state called Minas Gerais. We went to stay for about 7 days. The first 6 days were perfect. Not too cold, not too hot, the relaxing sound of animals, the fresh smell of coffee every day, that delicious farm food that my grandma did so well, a true paradise for a child. And then the night of the 6th day. I'll never forget that. The sounds, the sensations. For some reason, that day I was having trouble sleeping. My cousins were already fast asleep. I decided to walk to the kitchen to get a cup of water or something to drink. With luck, we would have some Coca-Cola in there. When I made it to the kitchen, I found my 2 uncles, who lived on the farm ground to help my grandparents with all the farm things and all that. They were talking about something. When they saw me, they smiled and continued their conversation. I don't remember what they were talking about, but it was lighthearted. Then one of them closed the door. I saw that there was an enormous quantity of locks on the door, including one that was a wooden bar that was placed horizontally over it. I didn't say anything, I just grabbed my water, then drank it before going back to our room. Later on in the night, I was awakened by the sounds of loud voices. I looked around a little lost, and I saw my cousin holding her sister in his arms. She was crying a lot and said, "You hear that, Matthias?" when she saw that I was awake. I then heard one of my uncles screaming, "It's coming back!" Soon after, I heard the first gunshot I'd ever heard in my life. I think it was a hunting rifle. I'm not a weapons guy, so I don't know the type. I nearly screamed. Then one of my uncles went into the room, a rifle in his hands. He saw us and seemed relieved. He smiled, but before he went back, he told us, "Stay away from the windows." And we did just that. For the next hour, I think, we 3 just got together and waited. I swear I remember the sound of something big circling around the property. It reminded me of when a dog walks, the sound of 4 legs hitting the ground. The sound of heavy breathing came really close to our window. Then there was a bang. My cousin screamed, and my uncle came into the room and led us to the kitchen. He never lost sight of that window, training the gun there. Then there was nothing, just dead silence. We slept in the kitchen, and one of my uncles stayed awake all night with us. In the morning, all seemed like a bad dream. But then I went out because I loved the smell of grass in the morning, and I saw these huge claw marks on the outside of the door. They looked 6 centimeters wide, enormous, and these huge dog-like footprints were around the house too. I asked the uncle that took us out of our room, and he said to me, like it was normal, "Well, this is our life here." I live in Limburg. That is the most southern province of the Netherlands. I'm 20 years old, and all my life I've been wanting to work as a caretaker for people with a disability. Just a few months ago, my dream came true, and now I work as a full-time caretaker at a living facility in Maastricht. At this facility, my story takes place. The living facility is positioned just outside of Maastricht City. Before the building became a housing facility, it was a laundromat for the people living on that street. The facility consists of 3 houses that are internally connected. Each one can house 8 people. That makes a total of 24 patients that live in the facility. Each patient has his or her own room, ranging from small to large, to a separate bathroom and kitchen, to a shared bathroom in the hallway. I first began working at this facility when I was just 17 years old, as an intern for my education. The story starts 2 years ago, when one of my patients that had lived there for 3 years moved out to live at another facility. His family claimed that the patient did not feel safe in his room because he would hear knocking coming from his closet. We made our apologies for the inconvenience, but didn't think much of it. 1 month later, when the room was cleaned and disinfected, a new patient came to live in the empty room. It was an elderly man, who I'll just refer to as Rick. Rick was a warm and kind-hearted man who always loved talking about horses that he had as a child, as well as his great love for Russian opera. You'd always catch him sneaking into the kitchen to get a snack or hear him sing opera. I must admit, he had quite a powerful and wonderful voice. At first, he would bid us a good night before he went to bed. But as time went by, Rick seemed more and more distressed. He didn't eat and didn't drink as much as he used to, and he lost weight at a troubling rate. He would sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly at nothing. When asked what was wrong, he would say that he had a terrible nightmare of some kind of creature lurking in his closet. My colleagues and I debated whether or not he could be getting Alzheimer's and would need testing for it. He had been tested, but nothing came out of those tests. Every night, Rick would scream us awake, and when we came into the room, he'd be sitting on his bed, trembling and pointing at the closet. He'd say that something crawled out of the closet and joined him in his bed. He described this creature as being skinny, even bony, with rotting meat hanging from its bones. The creature had green eyes, the same color as his deceased mother, and huge fingers that ended in claws. The creature's face was that of a human skull, those green eyes being nothing more than small lights, and a mouth that was filled with sharp teeth, like a crocodile. The creature would lie next to him in his bed, wrapping its claws around his body. Rick described so vividly how he could smell the horrible scent of decay as the creature opened his mouth to whisper in his ear, "Get out! This is not your home." Rick would cover his ears as he said that, and he would soil himself. Poor Rick. My colleague checked the closet, but there was nothing there, and the only thing we could say was that everything was going to be fine. Fast forward about a month later, and Rick would wake up with markings all over his body, deep scratches that appeared to be claw marks. There were even bite marks that were deeper and more animalistic than any human bite. Rick would not want to go into his room anymore, and he would bring his dinner to his room and place it at the door of his closet. My colleagues would take the food away, much to Rick's horror. He'd say that we would make the creature angry, and if it was angry, it would punish him. I feel so sorry for him, especially seeing the fear in his eyes as we scolded him and took away the plate. There was 2 weeks of this, the same thing happening with Rick. One of my closest colleagues and I were working the night shift one night. We were making our usual rounds, checking if everyone was sleeping and all the machinery was still up and running. That was when we heard a horrible, bone-chilling scream echo through the building. The scream came from Rick's room. We stormed in, throwing the door open hard, revealing a horrible sight. Rick was lying on his back in his bed, while he was grasping for air. He was clawing at his neck and chest, ripping the flesh off, making bloody gashes all over his upper body. His bed and himself were covered in blood, and there was a trace of blood leading to his closet, which was now slightly opened. My colleagues dialed 112. That's the emergency line in the Netherlands. While I desperately tried to stop Rick from clawing, the only thing Rick did was scream, as if possessed, and stared at the ceiling. After what seemed like forever, the ambulance came and took Rick away. A week later, we received the sad news that Rick had died. The room once again was left empty. The blood was cleaned up by a cleaning company and the room would be occupied soon enough. But even before the room was occupied, I found another patient standing in the room in front of that closet. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" I asked her as I walked into the room. The patient had stared at me and had muttered,
"This room should not be occupied ever again. It is angering him."
Who's him?" I asked with a shaky voice.
"You know who I mean. The devil who lived in the closet."
After she said that, she walked out of the room and left me breathless. 2 weeks later, that same patient moved into the room. I don't know why she was placed in that room, but I do know that she too changed. She can't remember her own name now, and all she does is sit in front of that closet, talking to the devil. I don't know what's going on at my work, but strange things keep happening. Colleagues tell stories of hearing footsteps in the hallways. Others hear whispers in the garden, and one even claimed to have been attacked by a shadow demon. Whatever's going on, one thing is for sure. The creature in the closet is real, and he's not happy about our patient living in his room.
It all started when I was 7 years old. I used to live in a small neighborhood with a large amount of woods next to our town. One day, my parents left me at home with my brother while they dropped my other brother off at football practice. That was the starting point. They had to stop abruptly in the middle of the road in the woods when they were driving back home. And that memory has been bothering my dad. Even now, he said. He said that he definitely saw something that day and remembered what it looked like. It was an extremely thin figure, around 7 to 8 feet tall. He was sure that it wasn't a bear because when it saw their car, the thing stood up on 2 legs and ran away with a strange form. It had lots of blotches on certain parts of its body, while other parts were losing hair or had none at all. And its back looked broken and poorly arched when it ran back into the woods. When my parents had warned me about it, even then, I never knew what it was. After I turned 10 years old, one day I had to stay home alone while my parents went to visit my uncle. So I invited 7 of my friends over who I'll call Bella, Riley, Max, John, Kayla, Shannon, and Penelope. We had fun playing video games, watching movies, and things like that until midnight. Then I suddenly remembered that thing my dad had seen a few years ago. "Hey, why don't we go searching for that creature?" Looking at each other, we thought it would be a fun idea to try. So we grabbed our flashlights and headed out into the woods. Once we walked in, everything mysteriously got way creepier, and the weird sounds got louder. The whole area was totally dark, and the fear of getting lost was affecting all of us. Suddenly, we heard a loud crunching noise. We shined the flashlight in the direction of the sound, and finally, we saw it. There were some dead carcasses of deer, and I could see that there was some other big animal. At first, I thought it might be a bear that was eating off of those carcasses. However, that's not what it was. The thin, hairy, and almost 8-foot-tall creature was there. It looked at us with its blood-stained, sharp teeth and bloodshot eyes. Then it slowly got up and let out a penetrating howl. Not caring if branches hit us or if we got cut or bruised, We all screamed and ran away through the woods. We didn't know whether it was chasing after us or not, but we didn't care. We just needed to get back home as soon as possible. Finally, we jumped over the creek that was right in front of my house, ran up the hill into my house, and then locked the door. "Everybody all right?" Breathing hard, I looked at my friends, and then I realized something. Penelope was gone. We must have lost her in the woods somewhere as we ran away. Being terrified, I pulled out my cell phone with trembling hands, called 911, and told them about our situation. Within 15 minutes, paramedics, police, and our parents arrived. We explained again what we had seen and what happened to Penelope. The police searched the entire forest, but never found the thing or Penelope either. The only thing that had been discovered was some bloodstains of hers. Well, I'm 12 years old now, and none of us speak about what happened that day. The search for Penelope has been going on, but I'm positive that she's dead. Not just me. We all do. I recently did research on the thing and noticed that many other people had gone missing in my woods, mostly kids, and Penelope's disappearance made her the 8th child to go missing in those woods. I now no longer go into my woods because I'm afraid that if I do, that thing will find me one day, and I will end up like Penelope.
My name is Magda, and I'm 26 years old. I work in an office in the city. On the weekends, I used to love to get away from all the hustle and bustle and take a trip to the countryside. Luckily, I have a cottage in a small village which is located right at the edge of the forest. How I used to love to get out of the city and spend the weekend in my little cottage. Why did I stop? Well, I'll tell you. After a hard week at work, I needed to rest, so I decided to get out of town. I went home, packed my bags, threw them in the trunk, and drove off. When I arrived in the village, it was late in the evening and I was tired from the long drive. I went straight to bed and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my car alarm going off. I looked out the window, but there was nobody in sight. I found my car keys, pressed the button to shut off the alarm, and the awful noise stopped. I laid back down and tried to fall asleep. All of a sudden, the alarm went off again. I didn't feel like getting up, so I just grabbed my keys and pressed the button once more. Everything was peaceful and quiet again. However, 5 minutes later, the alarm went off a third time. Once or twice could have been an accident, but now I was wondering what was going on. Could someone be playing tricks on me in the middle of the night? I got up again and pressed the button to turn off the alarm. But this time, I didn't lay back down. I stood at the curtains and watched. After a few minutes, I saw something by the light of the moon. A shadow emerged from the bushes and slowly approached the car. I could just about make out the shape. It was something tall, skinny, and black. The figure reached out with its long, thin arms and knocked on the car. The alarm went off again, and quick as a flash, the dark figure retreated back into the bushes. At that moment, I realized what was going on and began shaking with fear. I turned off the alarm and continued to watch. The thing emerged from the bushes again, slid silently over to the gates, threw a hand through them, and removed the partition holding the gates closed. I was paralyzed with fear, and I couldn't move. My mind was overcome by panic thoughts. What was it? What did it want from me? What was it doing? Would it ever go away? A shiver ran through my body, from my head down to my toes. My mouth was dry and my heart was beating fast. I was so tense, I was gritting my teeth and clenching my hands into fists. I regained control of myself and ran down the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me to the ground floor. I wanted to look for something I could use to protect myself. However, just as I was about to switch on the lights, I suddenly froze in my tracks. The dark figure was at the window. It was pressed up against the glass, staring in, looking to see whether or not there was someone home. I immediately ducked down behind the sofa and peered out. That's when I realized what all those tricks with the car were for. It was trying to lure its victim outside. I couldn't take my eyes off its hideous face. Its skin was the color of ash and covered with wrinkles. Its eyes were small, beady, and completely black. Instead of it having a nose, there were 2 ragged holes. It didn't have any lips, just 2 rows of sharp, yellow teeth. When it breathed, it was so heavy and hoarse that it was misting up the window. I just knew it wasn't going to go away. After standing at the window for a few moments, I heard a rustling noise as it came to the front door. I watched as it tried to push its fingers through the gap under the door. The handle began to twitch wildly up and down. The creature emitted a chilling sound. It was not like a human voice. It was a deep, beastly growl, like an angry dog chewing on a bone. I knew that if it heard me, it would keep trying until it found a way to get into the house. I crouched down behind the sofa, hiding in the shadows and desperately trying not to make a sound. Tears began involuntarily streaming down my face, no matter how much I tried to stop them. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, and I was shaking like a leaf, just waiting for it to end. I don't know how long I cowered there. I must have been passed out. When I woke up and looked out the window, the creature was gone. The door was still in place and everything seemed secure. I've never been so relieved in all my life. I ran upstairs and looked out the window. It was light outside and there was no sign of anything wrong. Taking a chance, I grabbed my keys and without stopping to collect any of my things, I ran out to the car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove away from the village as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I got back to the city. When I got back to my apartment, I turned on the radio and heard a news report. The announcer said that, in the village, the dead bodies of 2 girls had been discovered. Their corpses had been mutilated and dumped in a swamp. I guess the creature found what it was looking for. I don't want to, but I am curious to know. What would have happened if I didn't make the right decision of sprinting?
I grew up in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Have any of you ever heard of Zippo lighters? They're from here. A thick forest surrounds the town, along with most of the neighborhoods. My family lives sort of on the outskirts of Bradford. Of course, much like the town itself, our house was also surrounded by forest. If you took in the scene from our back porch, you would see nothing but sprawling trees for miles. I tell you this so you can gain a sense of isolation. Out at my house, you could scream at the top of your lungs, and no one would come to help you. This happened back in the summer of 1996. I was 11 years old at the time. I had a childhood friend named Marty, who was the same age. Our fathers worked together and knew each other well. He would come over almost every Friday to hang out. Marty and I found ourselves hiking through the trees as we often did. However, we were feeling a bit daring and went further into the forest than we usually did. There was this barrier of trees that we would never go past, simply because I didn't know the area beyond that point. We continued past the barrier into uncharted territory. We eventually came upon a clearing. In the middle of this clearing was an old, disheveled-looking tent. Being the curious young men we were, we of course had to see inside. As we approached, I could feel the temperature around me drop. I'm no stranger to the cold, but this was in the middle of summer. Even at my age, I could sense that there was something truly sinister inside this tent. A part of me was screaming to hightail it out of there, but my own curiosity pushed me forward. We both stopped just outside the tent, and suddenly, we were both too frightened to move any further. We were both frozen in place, staring at the open flap of the tent as it swayed from side to side. The sky seemed to grow even darker since we discovered this tent, and though we were standing directly in front of it, we could not see inside. What happened next is the reason that I still struggle with alcoholism. A dark hand slowly emerged from the tent's opening. It reached out to us, with long black nails protruding out from its fingertips. I'm not ashamed to admit that I pissed myself out of fear. The hand slowly turned and made a beckoning gesture with its index finger, and that's when Marty and I heard a deep, bellowing laughter from inside the tent. I don't remember much about what happened after that. I just remember me and Marty running for our lives, tearing through the woods and back to my house. I do have a vague memory of me briefly looking behind me as I ran, to see a tall, dark, and human figure standing just outside the tent. Upon returning, Marty immediately called his mom to come pick him up. My mother asked us what was wrong, and we both explained to her that we saw some kind of creature in the forest. My mother ultimately dismissed our claims, but led us in a prayer while we waited for Marty's mom to arrive. Marty never came back after that, and we sort of drifted apart. Sadly, Marty began hanging out with the wrong crowd and began doing hardcore drugs when he was around 14. He ended up hanging himself in his bedroom when he was 17. As for myself, I suffered from severe night terrors that tormented me for years after that day in the woods. I'm not going to get into what I experienced in my nightmares, but I will say that I became an alcoholic as a result. After moving far away and attending numerous AA meetings, I'm glad to say that I've turned my life around, and I even have a family of my own. I still visit Bradford every now and again to check in on my aging parents. Whenever I'm there, I always set flowers on Marty's grave. I'm still convinced that what we saw that day in the woods contributed to his death. Now that I have some perspective, I think what Marty and I encountered was a demonic presence. It followed us home and proceeded to turn both of our lives upside down. There were rumors of people worshiping Satan out there in those woods around the mid to late 90s. Perhaps they awakened something, and Marty and I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
This is a true story told to me by my grandmother a few years ago. I'd brought up Bigfoot as a topic and showed her the famous Ohio howl. She snapped to attention in fierce recognition and said, "I heard that one time when me and your grandpa were fishing on the river." It happened down in southeastern Oklahoma, west of Broken Bow Lake, when my grandparents decided to go catfishing in a spot we'll call the Big Hole. This was their favorite place to catch catfish, as the depth of the river allowed for bigger fish than what was normal. And so after a long drive into the woods, they picked their place along the bank and set up their gear. Sitting on the bank, they were enjoying the nice time period between sundown and nighttime, feeling the cool air from the water cooling them off from the fleeting sun's rays. That's when they heard what was described as a yell from upriver. Now it's at this point I have to say that my grandmother is a sweetheart, but in some situations, she lacks some common sense, as when she heard the yell, the first thing she did was to mimic it. They went back and forth between each other for about a minute, before it stopped, and she thought that was the end of it. Hours pass, and sometime around midnight, they hear the same yell again, only it's closer and louder than before. If you're wondering whether she tried to mimic the yell again, the answer is yes, and again it was a back and forth. However, this time when it stopped, there was silence for a while. Suddenly, an enormous splash came from just up the river. After the first splash, there was another, and another, until they realized it was rocks being thrown into the water steadily coming closer with every throw. My grandfather decided that he'd had enough and started to pack everything they brought, telling my grandma to go start the truck that was sitting at the top of the embankment. Once she got to the top, she froze at the trailhead because she could see a dark figure in the trees standing next to the truck, yards from where she was. This figure was taller than the truck by at least a foot or more, and easily towered over her. She could hear this thing breathing heavily, not in a tired way, but more aggressive, as if to say, "I know you're here, but I own this land, and you aren't welcome." Right then and there, my grandma made the smartest decision of the night and walked right back down the bank to my grandpa so she wouldn't have to be alone with that thing. When she got back down there, he asked her why she hadn't started the truck, but all she said was, "Let me help you and I'll tell you later." They finished packing and now had to return to the truck, but once they got there was no sign of that thing she had seen. Relieved, they hopped in and sped out of there as quickly as possible. In the truck, she told him of the figure she saw by the truck, and the two of them swore they would never go back. To this day, they still haven't, and now that the roads going there are all blocked off by the Forestry Service, I doubt they ever will. I marveled at her story because not only was she someone who didn't make up tales, she was also a very experienced woodswoman and had accompanied my grandpa on many hunting and fishing ventures. So to say she knew about the animals that should and shouldn't be in the forest would be an understatement.
I live in Oregon in an area that has a lot of open areas like farms, lots, and just open fields. We also live about 6 miles from the nearest city. My parents own a lot of land, including our backyard, which is a well-kept area, and then it turns into a forest. Well, about 10 years ago in 2011, for about a week or so, I remember hearing weird stuff out in that forest. And one day my father said that he was grilling and he went inside. He went inside for maybe 3 minutes, but when he came back outside, the grill was open and all of the meat was gone. He thought maybe it were raccoons. So again, he grilled another day and the same thing happens. After the second time, my father went to check the tapes, and what he saw was terrifying. It looked like something from a movie, like the movie Signs, the Alien movie. It was very skinny, with no hair on his body, with eyes that would not be considered human eyes. My dad was a jokester, so I was convinced that he was playing a joke on me. He told my uncle what was going on, who's a police officer. He called him over to the house, showed him the video, and asked what he could do. My uncle didn't take my father serious, just like me, because my father was always playing jokes on people. To shut my father up, he told him that he would look into it. They decided not to tell my mom because she would freak out. I've never seen my father be this serious before. I thought it was just great acting until I woke up out of nowhere that same night. I heard the same sounds I had been hearing before. My room was in the back of the house on our second floor, and I always kept my window open. So I looked outside in the darkness of the forest and just stared for about a minute. At that point, it was time for me to investigate. I had to see what it was or who that was messing with me. I watched a lot of military and spy movies, so I decided to sneak up on whatever this was with my camera. I went outside, silently walking into the forest with my night vision on. And this is what I caught on camera.
I'm hearing the things in my woods again. I don't know if you can hear the noise. I'm recording with night vision right now. I've been hearing the sounds in the back of my woods. Quite a bit. The heck is that? Oh my god!
I know that's what I've been hearing, but I'm not sure what it was or what it was doing, honestly. I just know that I surprised it. I'm not one to say that this was something weird, but maybe it was an animal, but it didn't look like any animal that I've ever seen in this area, or any human. What do you think it was?
I grew up in a semi-small town. By semi-small, I mean it was small enough for everyone to know each other. We had a library and a high school. In this town, there was one specific alley that led to nowhere, and there was not a single street lamp to light it at night. Apparently, this alley was restricted. There was a sign of no trespassing, and in general, my parents were also very shady about that. They told me there is nothing there but some kind of a warehouse of the city, and I should not think about it too much. However, there was also an urban legend. This was that kind of an urban legend that your brother tells you when you're young and naive, when it is so easy to scare you, but he still makes the effort to make it up as a horror story to keep you at night. I also heard the story for the first time from my brother Kevin. As the story goes, the warehouse is not a warehouse at all, but is used to be some government medical building where human experiments were carried out. Later the public found it out and it was shut down, and we can't go near it because there's still expensive medical stuff there. But supposedly there is also this creature that walks the halls of the old building, and at night he comes out to eat. When Kevin told me this story, I was 8 or so. I remember asking him, "What does it eat?" At this point, I should tell you that at this time the whole community was looking for a lost kid, Mark, who was my classmate. Kevin said, "Well, people, of course. What do you think happened to Mark?" When he said that, I started crying so loud that our parents noticed and came upstairs. Mark was my friend, and I couldn't bear the thought that he was eaten by that thing. My parents were so mad at Kevin. I remember my dad even slapped him. Not because he made me cry, but because he dared to talk about the alley. It was not the last time I heard about the being in the alley. In fact, as time passed, it became kind of an inside joke between young people. Every time some family moved or we noticed someone missing from the class, we jokingly said, "Probably the being in the alley got him." Kids love that stuff. Adults, not so much. Even heard about a kid who was suspended after he joked about the being before the principal. When I became 12, talks about the being became subtle, because there were also talks about people vanishing, and it suddenly was not funny. There was this older kid, Eric, a real bully. He always walked with these 3 henchmen of his, beating up kids, stealing their lunch money, that sort of stuff. He always got away with it because his dad was the police chief. They beat me up a lot too. Even stumped a cigarette on my arm once. The burn is still visible. Long story short, I was scared as shit by these bunch. Among all, by Eric. Around this time, my parents decided I should take folk dance classes. Yeah, like I was not bullied already. But anyway, the folk dance community was really nice. Made a lot of new friends there. The problem was that the classes were late in the afternoon and lasted till the evening. But of course, my parents always picked me up as soon as possible. On one evening, my dad was supposed to pick me up, but he didn't. Later he told me he simply forgot, but I know he was out there drinking, so I decided to walk home alone. It was around 8 p.m., so it was already getting dark. The streetlights were on, so I didn't worry. As I turned the corner, I noticed a group of older boys was fooling around on the street. Of course, it was Eric and his gang. I tried to walk past them while keeping a distance if possible. Eric had a handcuff, probably from the chief, and he handcuffed one of his goons to a street lamp as a joke. I tried to be as invisible as I could, but just my luck, they noticed me. "Look who's here," said Eric. "Get him!" he screamed, and 2 boys ran towards me. I tried to fight them, but come on, I was outnumbered. Eric threw his cigarette on the ground and stepped on it. Then he released his friend, the one handcuffed to the lamp. They started to walk towards me, and Eric started to speak. "Well, I'm glad you came. You're in luck you can finally meet the 5th member of the team." They started laughing, then 2 boys grabbed and dragged me. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. "Patience," said Eric. We went past one street and the other, and finally, we've arrived at our destination. Yeah, it was that damned alley. As I mentioned before, there was no streetlights, but complete darkness. As we passed the no trespassing sign, I started rationalizing things. There's no way that story's true. It's an urban myth. It's made up. They just want to scare me. They're gonna beat me up and then leave me alone, I told myself. We reached the end of the alley. At this point, my eyes got used to the dark, so I could see most things. There was a pole on one side of the alley, and a door on the other. Then those jerks handcuffed me to the pole, so I couldn't run away. I told them this was not funny. Then Eric said, "Well, you're right. It's not. Not yet, anyways." As he said that, he took a key out of his pocket and then opened the door, then knocked twice on it. What happened next, I never forget. The boys, along with Eric, started running away while laughing uncontrollably. All I could see in the building was darkness. Then a form started to slowly emerge. It was quadrupedal. First I thought it was a large dog, but as it moved, it became much clearer. Hairless thing with a really long neck, like a goose or something. I could see his spine, his head pointed towards the ground. What it did, I wouldn't call walking, but an increasingly fast crawling. When it reached the door, he lifted its head. I was freaked out. That thing's head was somewhat human-looking, although it missed the nose, but had a hole in that place, and was full of scars. And its eyes, those were human eyes. Its body was like that of a quadrupedal human. Between its legs there was nothing but a wound. Its hands were missing the thumbs, looked like paws. It stopped and sniffed the air, then started panting like a dog. It didn't look straight at me, but was looking all around me. Then we made eye contact. It noticed me. His jaw started opening much larger than a human possibly could. I noticed that its teeth were also much sharper. As it opened its mouth, I heard the most terrifying scream. I started crying and moving all around. Then the thing ran towards me and bit my leg. With my other leg I managed to kick the beast, which annoyed him enough to let my feet go. As it would jump on me, I managed to pull the pole out of the ground and accidentally hit the creature with it. That animal must have noticed that I released myself, because it ran straight back to the building. I didn't think much and ran back home immediately. Didn't look back either. Years passed since then. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. The police chief had a fatal stroke a year ago, and suddenly Eric wasn't so untouchable. Heard he went straight to prison when he was caught beating up one of his goons. He deserves it. That guy is a psychopath. And that thing, I don't even want to think about it.
I was 12 when this happened. Today's my birthday, and I'm turning 13. So one day I went to get groceries from the nearby convenience store. I was curious about what my mom had given me, so I took the list out and read it. Onions, carrots, sauce, chilies, and a lollipop. My 5-year-old brother loved lollipops. I did too, but I didn't like them as much as he did. So I bought the items and I went home. Mom wasn't home yet, so I gave my brother a lollipop and took one for myself. I went to my room and was about to start watching Netflix when I heard my brother talking to someone. I was puzzled. My mom hadn't come home yet since I didn't hear the door open. There was no one else here. I got up and went down and saw my brother by the window talking to someone. I walked up to him and he turned around. I asked who he was talking to and his answer scared me. Oh, it was my new friend Alberto. I knew all of his friends, but none of them were named Alberto. I went near the window just to see a dark shadow fade into the woods near my house. That's when my mom came in. She asked why I was looking so frightened. I told her what my brother told me, and she wasn't shocked or anything like that. I was a scaredy cat. I would never watch horror movies, and if I did, I'd usually not be able to sleep for 3 nights. But what I'd seen was real. She didn't believe me and told me it was probably my imagination. After a few days without any commotion, my mom said she had to go to her college and she said she had to file some admission paperwork. She left, and my brother took 2 lollipops out of the packet. I didn't pay much attention to it and went to my room. Then I heard a sucking sort of sound like when a kid's sucking on a toy or a lollipop. I rushed down and saw my brother near the window crying. The window was open and there was a creature who was sucking on both the lollipops. It was black with a huge mouth which spread from one ear to another. It had greasy long hair which was dripping with some sort of liquid that looked like blood. I screamed and ran toward the window and shut it down. I was surprised he didn't do anything. I took my brother and ran upstairs. I could hear it banging on the windows. I took my phone and called the police, and then I called my mother. She was mortified. The police said that they would arrive in 10 minutes. We hid in our bathroom because that's what we're supposed to do, right? My brother was still crying, repeating the words, "I got one for him and one for me, but why did he take both?" I hugged him. My brother was the most annoying kid in the world, but he was my brother. What was 10 minutes felt like 10 hours until the banging stopped and we heard the siren of the police car. My mom burst into the room and hugged us. She then took us downstairs. The police were there. There was blood all over the window and on the carpet. The police didn't get him. I had nightmares for a month after that incident. It was clear that my brother had nightmares too, since he woke up crying every night for about 2 months. After about 5 months, we moved out. Now, I love my new home. I didn't have any friends at my old home, but here I made 2 besties. Now as I'm writing this, I remember another thing. The creature was eating the lollipop with one hand, and in the other he had a leg of a human.